I've had a few scary encounters in my life. Not sure if that means that I'm old or just a creep magnet, but this one still creeps me out. In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this and that. One night when we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling, because bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I'm female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went looking for you. Again, all the lights are off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in a country, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it. And 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could hide in the living room with a coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face, as if he was trying to peer in, and looked exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavy set, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw. But then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out, and "I'm here." Right as there was another flash of lightning, Creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking towards the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let Creepster know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and to lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up to this point extremely clearly. I then remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out of the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben, in a very calm but firm voice, say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part. I just remember my fear and Ben's voice. So I'm not sure if I saw Creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line and it wouldn't work, whether from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. For the record, they're the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street would actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun, and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming, but he stayed with us until our parents came home. There was definitely no police involvement though. We just went on with our trip, but we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. When I was around 6, my parents divorced, and my dad was soon given full custody, as my mom is an alcoholic and had racked up a few DUIs and such. Anyway, me, my younger sister, and my dad moved to a new neighborhood, and we transferred to the nearby elementary school. The school was pretty close to my new house, maybe 5 to 7 or so blocks away. Close enough to walk, but my sister and I, also a girl, were too young to walk alone. Sometimes our dad would walk us to school in the morning and then walk back, and less commonly he'd walk to pick us up. Most of the time, he'd pick us up in his black Mazda. The way pickups worked at my school was pretty common. We went out with our class, stood by our teacher and classmates, and when a car pulled up, designated staff members would ask who the student was that they were picking up, and then go find them with their class and escort them to their car. Seeing as my mom was in jail at this time, the only person who ever picked us up was my dad. One day, I was in 3rd grade, and my sister was in 1st. We were outside, waiting to be picked up. After being outside for only a few minutes, my little sister came over to me and said someone who wasn't our dad was in a car to pick us up. He'd said both of our names, and they'd found her first. She said he'd smiled at her and told her our dad had told him to pick us up that afternoon. But she said she wanted to find me first before she got in the car, since she didn't recognize him. Thank God she did that. Our dad has always told us not to talk to strangers. So I grabbed my teacher and I told her what happened. She got a really alarmed look on her face and told us to stay where we were while she told another teacher. Our dad arrived to pick us up a few minutes later and we got home safely. We told him about it and we all had a long talk about safety protocol. He asked my sister to describe the man and the car, and he called the police and gave them the best description he could. Although my sister was very young and wasn't very focused on important details like that. A few weeks later, it happened again, but this time he said my name. My dad had given the school the same info he'd given the police, but presumably he had multiple vehicles because my sister said he'd been in a red car and this one was black, similar to my dad's. I saw the black car and ran up to it. But luckily, I caught a glimpse of the face before I opened the door and hopped in. He was middle-aged, really pale, with a really angular face. We made eye contact, and his mouth was smiling, but his eyes looked really wrong to me, squinty and almost angry. I turned back towards the carpool assistant, who delivered me to the car to alert her. But by the time I did, The car was gone, and I couldn't give many details. My dad contacted the police again, but without a license plate, they weren't able to do much. The last time I saw him wasn't till months later, near the end of the school year. I was walking home with a big group of friends that lived in my neighborhood, and he drove by us and slowed the car down to try and talk to us. I recognized his face immediately and alerted the other kids to run. Luckily, we were only about 3 houses down from where one of my friends lived, and we all piled into her house, concerning her parents significantly, as we explained the situation. I never saw him again after that. My dad started dating my now stepmom, and we moved to her neighborhood and switched schools shortly after. I still think about him occasionally, though. His face was actually in my dream a few nights ago, which reminded me to write about my experience. To this day, I'm in my 20s now. I don't know how he knew our names, how he knew anything about us, really. Very fucking scary to think about what would have happened to my tiny little sister if she'd gotten in the car with that man, and what might have happened to me if I had. To my childhood predator, please, please, let's not meet. When I was in high school, I worked part-time at a local coffee shop. One day, this kind of weird, overly friendly guy came in and started talking to me at the register. I wore a name tag with my nickname on it, and he asked me if it was short for anything. I said yes, and told him my full name. He asked me what kind of name it is. My full name originates from a Greek name, so I told him that, because it's kind of interesting. He asked me if I've ever been to the Greek festival in my city. I said no, and he replied with,
"Well, you belong there. Them Greek girls are hot."
Mind you, at this point, I'm 16, and this was a grown man. After that is when things got weird. He would show up to the coffee shop every day and ask my coworkers when I would be coming in, or if I was coming in that day. Eventually, he would start sitting at the seat right by the front door, waiting for me to come in. One day, he physically stood up and blocked my path and asked if he could buy me a coffee, yes, at the coffee shop I worked at, and then grabbed my hand. When I declined and tried to walk past to go to the back, he tried to follow me behind the counter and into the back room. He would hang out there for hours just watching me and would try to constantly talk to me. My managers eventually had to tell me to work in the back until he left every day, and then he started sitting in the seat closest to the back room. After that, I had to start coming into work through the back door and stay in there until he left. My coworkers had to tell him I quit, hoping he would stop. Then he became obsessed with one of the other girls, and the cycle started all over again. He truthfully didn't seem that harmful, except for the time he grabbed my hand, but it was creepy, and he was constantly there. The owner of the coffee shop had to file a restraining order in the end, because no matter what we did or told him, it didn't stop, and he was there, just watching and waiting. Nothing ever happened after the restraining order. He was allowed in the plaza the coffee shop was in still, just obviously not the coffee shop, and not near the patio by the front door. We usually saw him go to the grocery store until the restraining order. He just disappeared after that. Very creepy and kind of scary as a 16-year-old girl. Hello. This happened a few months ago. Just to clarify, we live in a pretty good neighborhood. To show you how safe it is, or so we thought. A few days before this happened, my dad took me to my drumming lesson. We were gone for about an hour, and when we came back home, we realized that we had left the key in the lock outside the whole time. No one took it, nor came in. This has happened before. Now, on to the actual story. One night at about 11 p.m., my mom and I were in the sitting room. My dad and sister were in bed. My mom was asleep on the couch, and I was playing PUBG Mobile. At one point, I could hear noises coming from the hallway. Thinking it was the cats, I brushed it off. I started to hear more noise, and then thought, what the fuck are they doing? Then I saw something roll on the floor by the dining room table, and one of the cats walking up to it, again thinking it was the cats. The object, however, was placed on top of a vanity we have in the hallway. They don't go on top of that, but we do have a 9 to 10-month-old curious kitten. I then heard a male voice. At first, I thought it might be one of my teammates in the game, talking. I quickly realized it was not. I then thought my dad had gotten up, which is pretty common for him, so I asked my mom. I didn't realize she was falling asleep, if my dad had come down and if it was him. She sleepishly said yes, so I tried to brush it off again. Suddenly, I see this thing, which I found out after were cleaning wipes for the interior of the cars that were placed on the vanity, flying at me and landing on the floor or near the stool in front of me. I don't remember. I thought, that can't be the cats. I got up and walked over to the hallway. I got to the step when I realized that my dad's walking stick and a straw hat that was on top of our coat hanger were on the floor. Neither cat has ever gotten on top of it. I walked up the step and I heard movement in the office. It was dark. The office is right next to the front door, about 2 meters from the living room front door. I thought it might be my sisters looking for something. And then this guy gets up, comes out of the room, goes to the front door, unlocks it, and walks out. He was wearing a hoodie, and I didn't see his face. I was paralyzed with fear and confusion. My mind immediately went to, do I know him? After he left, I yelled out to my mom that someone just walked out. She was obviously confused and concerned. We realized he came in from the back door, which was unlocked. He either climbed the gate, which is about 2 meters high, or walked up the neighbor's stairs and then over the wall. You can see the back door from the street. The only things he took were the back door keys and a Bluetooth player, we believe, which we don't care about. We made a barricade that would make noise if he came back and sat with knives and a big 2-tooth fork until about 5 a.m. We had another lock, so Dad changed it the next day. I slept with a knife under my bed that night. Looking back, I wish I had done something. I played rugby for 2 years. I know the basics to tackle, but I couldn't move, obviously because of fear. But my brain was also trying to understand what was happening. I probably could have taken him on. He was very thin and looked to be between 17 and 19, 20 at most, judging by his style and body. We think we might know who did it, but they didn't break in. They only took 2 things, walked past all of our valuables. He didn't do anything to us. It almost looked like he was trying to get my attention as well, almost as if it was a bet, and he tried to find a reason to get out. Either that, or he's the worst robber I've heard of. I'm just happy my sister was in bed. It probably would have been a different story if she had been there with us. A lot of people think they know how they'd react in certain situations. I am living proof. You don't. I thought I'd scream at least, but nothing. We now lock our doors every night. Every time I hear a noise, I get a little frightened, but I'm okay. If he wanted to hurt me, he would have tried. We got lucky. When my boyfriend and I, 24 female, lived with his grandparents a few years ago, my boyfriend worked early morning hours. He would leave the house around 4 a.m. One winter morning, while it was still pitch black out, my boyfriend kissed me goodbye and I went back to bed. A few minutes later, I heard continuous knocking at the front door. Immediately, I assumed it was him forgetting something, and being half asleep, I ran up the stairs from my room to open the door, but as soon as I reached for it, his grandma called out to me from upstairs and said, "Don't open the door, that's not him." I froze and was too afraid to even peek through the front door window to see who it actually was. His grandma looked outside and said it was a man that had no jacket on. He then left our doorway and went on his way through the streets. Our grandma told me she knew immediately that it wasn't my boyfriend, because if it were actually him, he would have opened the door with his house key. He wouldn't wake us up this early in the morning. Not long after, a cop car cruised down our street with a light on, as if they were searching for someone. I was so terrified that I decided to sleep upstairs in the living room. Later on in the day, our grandma spoke to our neighbors and found out that he was also pounding on everyone's doors on the same block. One of the neighbors, a couple houses down, is a huskier, taller guy, and said he talked to the stranger through the door, asking what he wanted. The man said someone is looking for him, they want to shoot him, and that he needs to hide from them. I'm more on the petite side, and at the time I was about 19. I can't imagine what could have happened had I opened the door for him, or if my boyfriend's grandma wasn't there. For clarity, I live in a fairly quiet apartment complex on the second floor. We had an elderly neighbor, I'll call him Joe. He was about 89 years old. This happened at about 1 a.m. I was watching Netflix in bed, and my partner was asleep. I had been hearing faint banging noises almost the entire night, but didn't really think anything of it. I thought I heard someone scream, so I paused my Netflix to see what was going on. But I didn't hear anything, so I continued on with what I was doing. I heard another scream, paused my Netflix, and that's when I heard someone yelling for help. I woke up my partner, and that's when we both heard, "Someone please help, she's trying to kill me." I was fucking terrified, but I wasn't going to just do nothing, so my partner and I ran outside to see what was going on. We get out to the hallway, and we see Joe and some 30 to 40-year-old woman at the top of the steps. The steps were concrete, and there were about 20 of them. As we take a closer look, we see Joe hanging onto the railing for dear life, and this crazy bitch trying to push him down the steps. There's blood all over the walls, and he's bleeding all over the place. My partner rushes over to grab her off of him, and I call the police. We're not really paying much attention to the woman at this point, because we're trying to see if our neighbor is okay, so she takes off somewhere. The police get there fairly quick and get the story. Apparently, she's his caretaker and was trying to force him to drive her to get drugs at 1 a.m. And since he wouldn't comply, she was trying to force him down the steps by pushing him down them, which, if she succeeded, he would have definitely passed away, since there are so many steps, and they're also concrete. While the police are getting their reports, the ambulance gets there, and they're checking on our neighbor. Out of nowhere, the lady comes, quite literally out of the bushes, and jumps in Joe's car and takes off. As she was backing out, she hit the ambulance with his car and just sped off. Not sure why she was so persistent on having Joe drive her when she had his keys anyways. The cops go after her and catch her shortly after. Turns out she's been arrested 50 plus times for just about anything you can think of. Years ago, I worked at a natural food store. I started there within the year after graduating from my first college, and I was just trying to get a handle on working a regular job and paying for my own apartment by myself. Working in the store was all right, and became better as I was allowed to work in the grocery department, which gave me more freedom to move around the store and a wider variety of tasks to perform. Periodically during the day, I would circulate through the stock room to check with our receiver and see if there was any new stock to be put away. At times, independent local vendors' representatives would drive up to the loading dock and bring in products that were ordered and needed checking in. For some reason, I crossed paths with one vendor rep from a local bakery, and anytime he was in the building, his attention would snap onto me. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was usually given pre-packaged samples of new products to hand out to the stores, and he would usually give me a couple, even though I had no authority to order things. I just thought, oh cool, free snacks, in case anyone has alarm bells going off because of getting food from a veritable stranger. This was a trusted vendor that had been with the store for years and years, and the baked goods samples were packaged where they were made, so they were the same safety and quality as if you had gone to the store and bought the full-sized products. I had no reason to be afraid, and so it continued off and on for a couple of months. Eventually, the guy starts asking me seemingly innocuous questions that were dispersed far enough apart that my naive brain didn't feel the need to be put on guard. He asked things like what kind of car I drove and did I like it. He would cover for his questions by adding extra explanations, such as that he was thinking of getting a used car and was asking around for information. I told him I didn't have a car, which was true. I lived within a few blocks of the store at the time. At that, the guy wrote his number and first name on a piece of paper, telling me I could call him if I ever needed a ride anywhere. I still didn't get it and thanked him politely, though I knew I'd never take him up on that. Anywhere I needed to go, I could get to on a combination of busing and walking. I was very independent, and I didn't like to feel like I was ever inconveniencing anyone. One day, I came into work as usual and went through the stockroom on the way to the time clock to punch in. The receiver rushed over and snatched me into a tight hug, telling me she was so glad I was okay. I thought she was being funny, so I asked her what for. She told me that the former vendor rep, who had seemed so enamored with me, had gotten a girl to get in his car with him. Then he drove to her apartment, subsequently attacked her, attempted to assault her, beat her bloody, then set her apartment on fire, fleeing the scene. Luckily, the woman he attacked was able to escape her burning apartment by climbing through a window. I became so much more wary of acquaintances after this incident. I feel really fortunate to have never put my trust in the guy and gone with him anywhere. You never know with some people. So I was around 7 at the time, and it was summer 2011. I live in a pretty small village in France, where everyone knows each other and everyone trusts each other. My parents were working all afternoon, and before going to work, they would drop me and my little sister at our grandparents' house, which was a 20-minute walk from where I lived, and our cousin would also join so we could play, watch movies, etc. It was summer vacation, and as usual, I was with my cousin and my sister, which are both 3 years younger than me. We took our bikes and went out to ride around where my grandparents were living. There was a field very near where we would always go, and a large place in front of it that served as parking for those living nearby. So, the place wasn't isolated. We had an order to get back home at 8 p.m. from our grandma, because that's the time where our parents would come fetch us. While we were at that place, I remember there was a woman playing with her son in front of her house with a water gun, and a red car parked in front of her house. I know this car wasn't a car from someone around, because I knew that village very well, but I thought nothing of it. There was a guy sitting in the car during the whole time we were there with our bikes, and that was the only thing that I thought was weird. So, anyways, after we finished eating at around 7 p.m., we begged our grandma to go out to ride our bikes again, and after lots of hugs and negotiations, she accepted, but told us to be careful because it was getting dark and to not follow or accept anything from a stranger. So, we went out again, and we go back to where we had been all afternoon before, only my cousin, little sister, and me. I'm going to be honest here, but for some reason, I was so nervous that my stomach was hurting, and I was almost crying. I didn't know why at the time, and I thought I was afraid of vomiting because my stomach was hurting, so that's why I was nervous. When I was that age, vomit was my absolute phobia. Now that I'm older, I can only think that what I was actually feeling was anxiety. So, while my sister and cousin were talking and riding together, I was just sitting on my bike trying not to cry and watching them. We stood there a long time, and as usual, we didn't watch the hour. My grandma was used to us coming back late though, but we would get scolded every time. Then, the red car appeared again, except this time, there was now 3 guys in it. They all had lots of muscles and seemed to be in their 30s. They stopped by my little sister and cousin, and, being the older one, I quickly approached to see what they wanted. I was, and still am, a really shy person, so I didn't tell them to leave us alone, because at that point, something was just off and I wanted to leave. The red car stops, and the guy that was sitting behind the wheel gets out, all smiles and appearing innocent. He told us,
"Hey, I know where you live. We can drive you home."
with the voice of an adult talking to a baby. First big red flag. I politely tell him that no, we're fine, and that we were about to go back to our grandparents' house anyway. He became angry. Second big red flag. He told us that he knew our grandparents and that he was here to bring us back to them. At that point, I was thinking, why would he bring us back in his car while their house is literally like 5 minutes away? I asked him how he could bring us if we had the bikes, and besides, there was only 2 seats free in the car. He became even more angry and told us to just get in the car. She'll go on my knees, showing my little sister that was very short. At that point, I don't really know. I'm both thinking that maybe it's true, and he's getting impatient because we were already late, and he maybe had something else to do after bringing us back. And at the same time, I just have the word run in my head. So luckily, this ends well, because it turns out we were late a lot, and our grandma had sent my grandpa to go get us. When he arrived, he asked the guy what they were doing, and they just answered that they were checking on how we were, and left. I told my grandpa what had happened, and I can promise you, I've never seen him so enraged before. He called them all the insults in the world, and called the police right when he got home. That's when 7-year-old me understood what the fuck had happened, and I was terrified of going out for so long. Now it's okay, but I'm still so anxious about being outside, even if I'm with someone. Sadly, I don't know what happened next. I don't know if those guys were ever found. I don't know if they tried kidnapping other kids. I don't know anything. So, to those 3 suspicious guys in the red car in France on a summer evening in July 2011, let's not meet ever again. This happened nearly 20 years ago, but I will never forget it for the rest of my life. I went to college in a very small town in northwestern Maryland. Our school sat in the foothills of the Catoctin Mountains, and my friends and I would drive around the mountains smoking weed. We got very comfortable on the roads and knew them very well. This story takes place before we knew the roads, when we just got to school. Several of my girlfriends and I went out for a ride at night. The roads are winding and narrow. Some parts drop right off the side of the mountain. It was nighttime, so we were taking our time. We didn't see many cars when we would drive around, which was perfect. That night, however, as we pulled out of the parking lot, another car did as well. We didn't think much of it, as we thought it was another student. We entered the back roads, and the car is no longer behind us. As we go deeper into the mountains, a car comes up behind us. The car was very close to us, and we were getting freaked the fuck out. Mind you, we didn't know these roads yet, and they were backwoods roads, unpaved, and nowhere to turn around. I'm trying to drive as quickly as I can in order to get away from the car. All of us are freaking the fuck out and are convinced that this person is out here and is going to kill us. Finally, we see a chapel with a parking lot. We pull in, turn back to the road, and watch a red-haired man drive past us, slowly and staring at us. We book it down the mountain, park our car, and call public safety to tell them what happened. A day later, we get an email from campus security telling us to look out for a man with red hair, glasses, and a beard. He had been trying to get into the campus dorms and was following women around campus. When I was 8 female and my brother was 9, we moved with my mom to a very small town. After my parents split up, the new house was 2 stories with 3 bedrooms and a den. There was a large bedroom on the main floor with a full bathroom and a small den at the front of the house. The master was upstairs, along with another room that was entirely purple, paint, carpet, drapes. So my brother immediately claimed the big room on the main floor with the bathroom, and I was stuck in the purple nightmare. When we were moving in, we noticed a lock on the door to my brother's room, but it was odd because it locked from the outside with a key. We eventually found the key in the cellar. My mom just brushed it off. The room also only had one window, close to the ceiling, that was long but not wide and didn't open. So it let in light, but you couldn't really see out unless you stood on something. The other 2 bedrooms both had regular locks on the doors that locked from the inside. There was an attic at the top of the stairs that also had a lock on the outside, so we didn't think too much of it. We all went to bed that first night, and I don't remember anything too off myself, just new house strangeness. My brother, the next morning, said the light in his bathroom was flickering, water was running, toilet flushing, and he was a bit freaked out. My mom checked the room, and everything seemed fine in the daylight. He decided to stick it out. We explored the house that day, found the key to the door, and odd leftovers from previous people in the cellar and attic. The attic was right beside my room, and I was a bit spooked by it, but I'm sure that was just me being 8. The next night, after we all went to bed, I woke up to my brother screaming at the top of his voice, "Mom, help me! Please stop! Help!" from downstairs. I got there first because my room was closest, but my mom was right behind me. He was in his bed thrashing and looked like he was basically having a fit. When I got closer to his bed, he literally jumped out of it crying and stared at his bed. He said he felt something on his chest, holding him down, and what felt like thumbs being pressed into his eyes, and a voice whispering, "Die out, die out, die out," in his ear. We couldn't see anything in the room, but my brother was adamant that he was not going to stay in there. My mom was trying to cheer him up and said he could sleep in her room. My brother and I were halfway up the stairs, which were across from the room, and he asked her to please shut the door. I had never seen him so spooked. She laughed and said okay and went back to close the door, and even made a joke about being able to lock the door now, and did just that. As she started up the stairs towards us, we heard a loud knocking on the door coming from the inside. Needless to say, my brother and I screamed bloody murder and ran for my mom's bedroom, with her close behind. He moved into the small den the next day. He just couldn't sleep in there, so we turned it into a rec room and had our couch and TV in there instead. We never slept in that room, but anyone that came to stay with us said that they would be woken by activity in the bathroom or catch glimpses of something, but no one ever felt what my brother did. Thankfully, we only lived there for about 1.5 years. It's been 30 years now, and I've always wondered who or what was kept locked in that room, and why. My mom has always been able to see ghosts and spirits. She's had many different experiences, both good and bad. This has always made me a firm believer in ghosts. I can't see ghosts, though. I've always had a very good sense of what many people would consider vibes and such. whether it be from a person or from just being in a house. One day, a few months after I was born and had finally been placed into a different room than my parents, my mom got up in the middle of the night to get some water. She didn't know exactly why she woke up so suddenly, but pushed it off as not a big deal as she wandered into the kitchen. When she got into the kitchen and had her glass of water, she saw something in the corner of her eye, a sort of figure, and it was walking into my room. My mother, of course, decided to follow this said figure. She didn't know whether she had just been imagining it or not, but she wasn't going to risk it. When she was walking to my room, she could hear giggling coming from inside. Once she gets into my room, she notices the figure standing next to my crib with a smile. It was an old man wearing large glasses. The man notices my mom in the doorway and nods slightly before walking out of the door of my crib without a sound. My mom stands there for a second before making sure I was all right. I was. In fact, I was smiling myself. She then walked out of my room and headed back to bed, not mentioning any of this to my dad, who was asleep. A few weeks later, my mom and dad were going through some old photos of my dad's family. While looking through the photos, my mother notices a picture of an old man with large glasses. She immediately recognizes the man as the man who was in my room. She asks my dad who the man was, and he explained it was his grandfather who had passed away years before he had even met my mom. My dad and his grandfather were very close, and my grandfather's death had a huge impact on my dad. My mother told my dad about how she had seen his grandfather in my room that night she got up for water. This honestly has to be one of my favorite stories my mom told me about, because it made me know that even though I never met my great-grandfather when he was alive, he still cared and wanted to meet me. This isn't my story, but my dad's, but I feel it is worthwhile telling it here. My dad was a builder, contracted to the local council to carry out works on council buildings. In the UK, this also includes homes and flats. My dad was told his next piece of work would be in a flat building with multiple rooms and 3 levels. Homes and flats like these, when no one lives in them at the time, are called voids. The building is just empty rooms. When this happens, the council puts big heavy metal doors on the building to prevent thieves from getting in. You need a set of keys provided by the council. To get ahead of himself, my dad wanted to see the scale of work he would be undertaking rather than going there completely under-equipped and unprepared. So, my dad opens up and takes a look around. 4 rooms on the ground floor, same on the 2nd and 3rd, all connected by a staircase, which had a central shaft through the middle. You can see right to the ceiling on the 3rd floor. Stairs have metal bars for railings, a big job, but achievable in a few days. Gut the place out, replaster a few walls, and a repaint job. My dad goes to lock up, but he feels someone behind him. This, I am told, is not uncommon. Local people see builders go into empty buildings, and they want to see what they can take. So naturally, my dad turns around. "Mate, you're gonna have to leave. I'm locking up." But he said it to no one. No one was around him or had been in the building. Thinking this just an odd sensation, he thought nothing else about it, locked up, and went home. My dad told my mom what happened, but it was more of a passing remark, like, "Oh, this happened today. Weird," and nothing else was said. Anyway, the weekend passes, and my dad and his friend Martin go back to the job on Monday and begin opening up and proceed with the work. A local resident walks up and asks them how things are going, to which they both agree. It's going well, and some other small talk. He changes the subject. "It's a shame what happened in there, isn't it?" Both my dad and his working friend were confused. "A shame? What's a shame?" "Poor girl came home from school a few months ago and saw her dad hanging, tied himself to the railing, and jumped. My dad, of course, was now scared and felt that familiar shiver go up him. He didn't tell the local guy what he had felt, but he told his friend. Martin refused to go in the building alone, and they both agreed that they would always leave the central door open to make sure there was an exit if needed. My dad would be the first to tell you he doesn't really believe in ghosts, and he would also say he has never seen a ghost, but he did say this was the oddest experience he has ever had, and still cannot explain it. This happened roughly 20 years ago when I was a teenager. It was the early afternoon on a February or March day. It's been so long I can't remember exactly which, but I know it was one of those 2 months. I was going home on the bus. It was very crowded, but I managed to get a seat near the back. A stop or two after I got on, a group of 4 to 6 guys around my age, or maybe a year younger, got on. I moved over to the window seat so one of them could sit down. The other guys in his group sat behind me in the back row. Shortly after, I heard an old lady who was also sitting in the back row talking very fast. She was talking pretty quietly, so I couldn't quite understand what she was saying, but I think she might have been praying or something. She hurriedly got off the bus. Then I noticed a guy trying to get out of the back row and off the bus. Some of the guys from the group were trying to drag him back by pulling his backpack, but he managed to get away. My heart sank when I noticed this. Before I could do anything or try and get away, one of the guys behind me covered my mouth. The guy next to me went into my jacket pocket and took my cell phone. Then they all started to get up, and it looked like they were going to leave the bus. However, they didn't. The guy behind me covered my mouth again, and the one next to me went into my other jacket pocket, and they took my wallet and money as well. Then they finally left the bus. This all happened in daylight on a crowded bus, but no one called for help or anything. A lady at the front of the bus asked if I was okay. I was in shock and said I was, but I really wasn't. I've never been comfortable going on a bus since. When I was about 10, a really big storm went through the northeast corner of my state. It was about 4 p.m., and I was practicing with the community children's choir, an after-school program that I actually really enjoyed. We were practicing for a performance tour to all of the nursing homes in town. I sang in the soprano section, and we were receiving some criticism from our director when someone's mom showed up 30 minutes early to pick them up. Then another mom showed up, then someone's grandpa, and another kid's dad. One by one, everyone left early, and then my mom showed up. She seemed really worried and told me to hurry up and get in the car. So I grabbed my backpack and went out the door. When I walked outside, everything was dark. It was like the sun went down at 4:30 p.m. after spring forward. That just doesn't happen. Apparently, it stormed so badly in the hour I was at choir practice that parts of our town had flooded. There was hail so big it busted car windows and damaged homes. The ride home was pretty scary for me at that young age. I had no idea why I was picked up early. When we turned into my street, it was flooded. The neighbors were rowing a canoe from one end to the other, and the older kids were trying to ride their bikes through the muddy floodwater. We pulled into the driveway, and I immediately went inside and put my backpack in my room. My dad was in my room, cleaning up glass off of the floor and my bed. There was water all over the floor, and my bed was soaked on one side. He said the hail busted my bedroom window, and the rain poured into my room, and the hail melted on the floor and on my bed. My dad wasn't able to replace the window that evening, so he got a plastic tarp, the kind you use to cover furniture when you're painting, folded it into 4 layers, and attached it to my window with a staple gun. We had a movie night and just spent time together as a family that night. It made me feel better about sleeping in my room, but I still wanted a light on. It took me a while to fall asleep, but I read a chapter of Little House on the Prairie. I was a weird kid, and that helped me fall asleep. That night, I had a dream. At least I thought it was a dream. I heard a weird shuffling sound outside my window, like the sound of a window sliding open and shut, open, shut. I realized I wasn't dreaming, but I couldn't move. My eyes were wide open, but it was like I was still asleep. I tried to move my legs, raising my arms, even tried rolling off the bed, but my body was stuck. Finally, I just used my voice. I mustered enough strength to scream as loud as I could and managed to turn my head towards the window. All I saw were two hands with white gloves holding the wood frame of the window and moving it up and down, trying to jimmy it open. While I screamed a second time, he was gone. I jumped out of my bed and started to run to my parents' bedroom, but my legs felt like bricks, and it felt like it took forever to get there. When I was outside of their door, I just screamed at my mom that someone was in my window. Fear and panic overwhelmed me as tears started dripping down my cheeks. My dad went outside to investigate and didn't see anyone. I never knew why they didn't call the police right then. I ended up sleeping in my mom's bed, with her and my dad slept on the couch very close to my bedroom. The next morning, my dad walked around the house, and there were large, muddy footprints from the street to my window and back again. The screen to my window was ripped off and tossed into the neighbor's yard. The plastic on my window had a large hole the size of a man's finger right above the window lock. My parents did finally call the police. An officer came to my school to get my statement, and I just told him what I saw that night. I slept in the living room for months after that. So, this happened a while back. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old, meaning my brother, Alex, was around 8 to 9 years old. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew that something was wrong. So my brother and I start walking home, as the only two who got off at our stop were him and I. This blue and silver beat-up truck drives past us, and I think nothing of it. It never slowed down or stopped. It just kept going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother always told me to do with him, as he's my baby brother, and I want nothing to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. It was driving slower this time, and went up the road and turned, out of sight. Now Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side road, right off the main road the man just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving really slow down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew, but I did. As soon as we passed a house that blocked us from view, I turned towards Alex and spoke to him exactly 4 words. No questions. Just run. And we did. In our driveway, which is about 100 feet long, by the way, there is a row of bushes and pine trees that divide our home from the next-door neighbor. I dragged him in there, and I told him to be quiet, and I'd explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down and around the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying, and I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. I was more worried for him than for myself at this point. I was the big sister. I had to protect him. I looked at him, and I said that the truck was following us, and I told him not to be scared. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and it seemed to calm him down a little. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened, and out came a man. He was tall, skinny, and messy. Short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes, and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car. He started it and drove away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we're going to run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I still didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we had to move. I started counting. As soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway and into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it. The sound of accelerating. He saw us. He was waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house and made him run ahead to the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house key. The garage door was open. I swear to God, I saw this man round the opposite corner of the house that we did as I entered the house. We entered and I slammed it shut, locking and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex, screaming our safe word. My grandmother made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word that we could use if we were in danger. Just had to scream it basically. It woke up my aunt, who worked the night shift and was sleeping. We told her everything, and she stayed up with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police, and that was my first ever interaction with an officer. The man was never caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I'm just glad my grandma drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother or I would be right now if she hadn't. So, to the messy man in the blue and silver truck, let's not meet again. This happened in the American Southwest to my parents while on vacation. They stopped at a spot along their travel route to get some food and got talking to a young local who worked there. He told them about a box canyon that was on the way to their next stop. For those who don't know, a box canyon is characterized by being narrow, having high vertical walls, and a flat bottom. To hear my mom tell it, he described the canyon with an almost spiritual reverence, saying that it was incredibly beautiful and had superb acoustics, and that he loved taking his guitar out there to play. My folks liked doing stuff off the beaten path, so they decided to pay a visit. The canyon seemed to be quite isolated, with no buildings of any kind around for miles. By the time they parked their car and made it into the canyon's entrance, the sun was just starting to go down. They said they seemed to be the only ones there, with no parked cars other than their own. They made their way into the canyon. After the fact, my parents have both said that they, separately, without speaking of it, started to feel a touch of unease. Not totally unreasonable, as it was starting to get dark, and the canyon walls pressed close on either side. Despite this feeling, they continued on until they heard the noise. My parents report the nature of this noise differently. When I ask them to describe it, their faces sort of scrunch up, like it's an effortful task, or they're still uncertain. My dad said it sounded like a person, possibly a man, speaking a low, single word that he didn't understand. My mom says that it didn't really sound like a word of any kind to her, just a strange, deep noise that rang out from somewhere nearby, above them. It was accompanied by a brief, intense flash of pale light. Neither of them knew what it was, or where precisely it had come from, but they were both immediately filled with dread and an overwhelming desperation to get the hell out of the canyon. They turned around and booked it back to their car. As they exited the dark, closed space of the canyon, my mom describes feeling certain there was something chasing them, and thinking that once they got into their car, they would find it sabotaged. That thankfully was not the case, and they were able to get in and speed away down the empty road. My mom said she didn't feel safe until they'd been driving for a while, still having the panicked but totally unsupported notion that they were being pursued. When they eventually spoke about it to one another, they weren't able to make any real sense out of what had happened. Neither one of them really has a theory. This is probably pretty dull as far as spooky experiences go, but neither of my parents have a history of weird encounters or of telling tall tales. And so, it strikes me to see them both get re-creeped out by the mere memory of this incident. In April 2011, a friend and I were stargazing on my roof on a dry, clear night in New Jersey. We were observing the Lyrids meteor shower that wasn't producing as many shooting stars as we had hoped, but we stayed up there, intensely focused on the sky to see one every few minutes. After a couple hours of this, we caught a bright light in our peripherals. We turn around and see what looks like a bright blue-white LED flashlight traveling in the forest behind the house. At first instinct, we thought it was the police with a flashlight chasing someone, but then we realized that the light was up on the treetops, weaving through the canopy. All we could say is, "What the fuck is that?" over and over again as it got closer to us. It was traveling along the direction of the river behind our house and seemed to notice us because as it passed the back of my house, it slowed to a gentle stop, then took a 90-degree turn onto the clearing of our property about 40 feet from us, coming straight towards us, as if it had noticed us and wanted to check us out. This is when we got our first really good look at it. It was a perfectly defined glowing sphere of light, the size of a basketball, with what seemed like churning and flowing plasma inside, icy blue with a white hue, emitting absolutely no sound at all. We started screaming at this point. As it approached, it moved very slowly compared to the pace it had traveling through the trees. It seemed almost cautious in its movement. It's weird, but you could sense some form of intention and intelligence in its movement. We were horrified because we knew nothing could explain what we were seeing, and we weren't about to fuck around and find out by letting it get any closer. We scrambled off the roof and ran inside, hiding under a blanket like scared little children, even though we were in our late teens. We didn't talk about it much after that because we just couldn't explain it. About a year later, one of my neighbors is banging on my door, telling me to let him in. He told me that him and a friend were down by the river in the same patch of woods and were chased by a flowing silent light ball. This freaked me out because I knew he was telling the truth. I had never told him the story of my encounter. I've spent my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit, North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there to hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the Cold Mountain Trailhead, and I planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced at hiking or camping, but I had never camped alone. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now. On the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous, not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like a ton of ups and downs, and feeling like it wouldn't end. Eventually, it began to get darker, and I realized I needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So, I stopped about half a mile short of the summit, and I figured I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, ate my food, and went into the tent. At this point, I realized I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I have trouble sleeping and usually lay awake for up to an hour trying to sleep. During this, I thought I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. I brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag. That morning, I woke up and ate oatmeal. As I ate, I looked over at my tent and noticed a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with green cord, propped against my tent. Picture linked in the description. Internally, I was pissing myself, but I packed my crap up and took off within 5 minutes. And no way I bothered to go to the summit. I headed straight down. On the way down, I realized there was a pretty heavy fog, and I ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I was lost. I used a compass to eventually reorient myself and found the trail again, one of the biggest reliefs. I made it out with no other incident. However, come to find out, the same morning, a 27-year-old passed away on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. His family seems to have scrubbed the internet of several of the articles on him, but I'll see if I can find something. The scariest part was knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no clue about them. For a while now, I've been writing down my dreams because I remember them when I wake up, but I forget them once I'm fully awake. I do that because my therapist asked me to do so. Most of my dreams are a manifestation of my fears, according to her. One dream stood out because it didn't follow the same pattern as all the others. In my dream, I'm walking in a bright and sunny alley, and I get grabbed from behind, lifted from the ground, and a hand on my mouth prevents me from screaming. I try to get away by basically moving like a Tasmanian devil, but it doesn't work, and I woke up. What tipped my therapist off is that in all my other dreams, I see the danger from afar. I hide or run away, and there's always this intense fear that paralyzes me momentarily. Turns out, it wasn't a dream. It's a repressed memory. I was 12 years old. I know that because of my distinct haircut. I used to cut my hair myself as a symbolic fuck you to my stepmother, who took great comfort in destroying me from the inside. She'd forbid me to cut my hair, so I would always do it. I also liked it. It allowed me to express myself. Anyways, we're at my stepmother's brother's house. It's in the suburb. My dad, my stepmother, her brother, and his girlfriend are also sitting on the patio at the front of the house. They drink and talk. Next to the house, there's an alleyway that leads to a baseball field, then some park with water games to cool down during summer, and then a regular park with swings. Not too far, there's also a pool, an elementary school, a high school, and a community center. It's basically the whole package. I'm sitting with the adults while all the other kids went to the park. I was grounded for cutting my hair. My stepmother was delighted at the opportunity to shame me publicly for no reason, and my dad, as the spineless parasite that he is, said or did nothing. I stood up and left to join the other kids. I could hear her scream at me behind my back, but I didn't care. I walked out to the front yard, took the alleyway, and went straight to a swing to forget about everything. I went to play with the others after a while. We made this parkour route, and we tried to be monkeys. At 6 o'clock, we knew it was supper time, so we decided to go back to the house. Once we're almost there, the youngest daughter of my stepmother's brother realizes that her watch fell off. She got worried because she didn't want to be grounded. The other kids didn't want to go back because we would all get grounded for being late. Since I was already grounded, I told them to go. I went back to look for the watch in the park. Fortunately, we were all following the same path in the park, so it wasn't hard to find the watch. I grabbed the watch and run to go back to the house. On the baseball fields, I cross paths with a middle-aged man. He doesn't look suspicious at all, but moves suddenly as if he wanted to cut me to stop me from running. Right away, he takes a step back as if he'd realized it was too public. I double my speed. I run like a road runner. Just as I'm about to get out of the baseball field, another guy gets out of nowhere and grabs me. I resist, I fight, and I move like I have the devil inside to get out of his grip. The first man I crossed comes to help the guy. No fucking way. I'm not going down this way. I kick, I bite, and I hit. Fortunately for me, when one chooses to go for a two-man job, one better be coordinated. It wasn't their case. I fell down on the ground, straight on my stomach. I remember now the pain of having my breath cut short. I crawl in the opposite direction. I get to that white thing on the field. I guess it's a goal. I don't know baseball. I feel hands around my ankle. I grab the goal and smash it on the head of the guy grabbing me. I get up and run, avoiding the second guy. I cross the street without looking, get in the alley, and finally to the house's front yard. The other kids were as dusty and muddy as I am, so my state could be explained. I ran home, so me being out of breath could be explained. I said nothing. I sat down at the kids' table, gave the watch to the girl, and listened to my stepmother jubilate inside at the chance of reprimanding me. I don't know why I'm here, how I managed that. I don't live in the same province anymore. It was 20 years ago also. There's a baseball field near my house. When my therapist made me realize it wasn't a dream, I went to the field. Those goals are heavy. I don't know if they're different models or if things were done differently back then. I don't know how I lifted that at 12 years old, nor how I managed to get away from two grown men. Lately, I've been experiencing sleep problems. I can't stop thinking, what if? I'm working on it in therapy, but goddamn, there are some creepy nut jobs out there. This all started about a year ago. I, 23 female, live on the second floor of an apartment complex and have lived here my entire life. The building is mostly families with young children and married couples. A lot of the families have lived here as long as my family has, so everyone knows each other pretty well. There's only one apartment unit that isn't occupied by a family, but rather by a pair of brothers who keep to themselves. One day, one of their sons, around my age, appeared out of the blue. He was strange off the bat. He would always wear a sweatshirt with the hood up and would run through the apartment complex to get to his apartment. I'm not sure what his face looked like because he always had the hood over his face. He lived on the first floor, on the back side of the complex, and would often get into his place by jumping through the window. He basically did everything in his power to avoid any interaction. I didn't mind him because I never saw him due to my busy schedule. However, one day, he started sitting on the top of the staircase that leads to my apartment. This was strange because his apartment unit was on the other side of the complex and on the first floor. I brushed it off at first, but it started happening every day. When I would come home from school, he was there. When my boyfriend at the time would drop me off at night, typically around 10:30 to 11, he would be there. Sometimes when I would leave and come back hours later, he would still be in the exact same spot, as if he didn't move through the 5+ hours I was gone. At this point, I told my parents and my boyfriend about it, and they became very vigilant. My boyfriend would park his car and walk me to my door. Every night he dropped me off. Once he saw my boyfriend, he stopped sitting on the staircase, and I thought it was over, but it wasn't. He started waiting for me at my bus stop. The bus I take home from school stops right across the street from my home, so it's a short walk. One day, when I was getting off, I saw him waiting at the bus stop. Once he saw me get off, he followed me into the complex and sat on the staircase. He also started following me when I would walk my dog. At this point, my parents were upset. My mom started letting the neighbors know he was following me around. My neighbors started making sure he wasn't bothering me, or if I was alone, they would start a conversation with me until I got to my door. One day, I got a friend request on Facebook from this guy. Mind you, he had never spoken a word to me, so how did he know my name, let alone find me on Facebook? My mom tried talking to his father, but they would never answer the door when my mom knocked on their door. So I'm thinking, it can't possibly get any worse, right? He seemed harmless, so I wasn't too worried. I was wrong. One day, when I returned to my boyfriend's house, my mom told me she had something to tell me, but she didn't want me to get spooked. She proceeded to tell me that when she was walking towards the kitchen to get a glass of water, she saw something in the tree move. Our kitchen has a huge window that takes up most of the wall. In front of the window, there's a huge tree. If someone were to climb the tree, you could see into our apartment. Well, guess what? When my mom took a closer look, she realized my neighbor was sitting in the tree, looking straight into the apartment. My mom called my dad over, and when my neighbor saw my dad, he jumped off the tree. At that moment, I felt my peace stolen from me. We filed a police report, but when the police went looking for him, he was gone. It turned out there were snack wrappers and a blanket hidden between the leaves of the trees. The police think that wasn't the first time he was up on the tree. I couldn't help but wonder how many times he saw me walking around, and I had no idea. It's been about 6 months, and I haven't seen him since. His father still lives in the complex, but there's no sight of him. The police haven't been able to find him, so I have no idea what happened to him, but I hope we never meet again. A few years ago, I was on my way home. I usually take the bus, even though I'm pretty uncomfortable with strangers being too close to me, but I have no driver's license, and therefore, not much of a choice. Anyways, I'm sitting there, next to the window, listening to music, as a man sits down next to me. I don't think much of it. The bus is pretty full. I slide a little closer to the window so that the man does not come too close to me. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice that he keeps looking at me, which makes me very uncomfortable. So I obviously look out the window and try to ignore him. I'm getting pretty nervous at this point. Luckily, we're close to my stop. As the bus drives up to said stop, I shuffle around a bit and get up halfway. As far as I'm concerned, this is a normal social cue for strangers on a bus that I want to get out at this stop and for them to let me get past their seat. Well, this guy doesn't see it that way. So, I take out my earbuds and tell him politely that I need to get out at this stop and ask him to let me through. He grins and says no. I don't want to push past him because he then has direct access to my body, and I'm now really anxious. I think he sees it and takes up even more space so that I can't get past him. I also notice that he looks really unkempt and is about double my age. I was around 26 at this time. Also, I'm a rather petite girl and do not come across as very threatening or something. So, I say again that I have to get out, this time very loud, so that other passengers can hear me and help in case of an emergency. The man lets me pass, but still does not give me much space. When I finally get out and walk in the direction of my apartment, I notice he is behind me. I get scared. It is winter, and even if it's not too late, it's very dark, and in the city is not much going on. I call a friend and ask if I can come to her, so the man will not find out where I live. We're on the phone all the way until I'm with her. When I finally arrive, I turn around for the first time. The man is still there and grins at me. In the apartment, we kept looking out of the window, but the man is gone. My friend walks me home later. I have not seen the man since then, but I'm still nervous about having to take the bus, and always try to be as close to the driver as possible. So, creep on the bus. Let's never meet again. Earlier today, I went to brunch at a friend's house. After I'd been there for about an hour, a young couple I had never met before arrived. I was standing in the kitchen with a direct and clear view of the front door. If I were to walk straight from where I was standing, I'd walk right out the front door. I was only about 10 feet away from them. When they walked in, I saw a man, a pregnant woman, and a small girl who looked to be about 2 to 3 years old. The little girl looked shy and was holding a stuffed animal in her hand. The two adults came into the kitchen where I was standing, and we introduced ourselves. The wife and I share the same first name. Not sure if this matters at all, but I thought I'd share, since our name is not one that is super common, but also not super rare either. They were lovely people, and we had a great conversation. After introductions, we all grabbed seats in the open dining room, living room. I didn't see the little girl anywhere, but I assumed she was off playing with one of the cats at the house. The wife mentioned that she was 36 weeks pregnant and expecting their first child to be here any day now. At that time, I whispered to my boyfriend, who was sitting next to me, asking where the little girl went. He was confused AF. I then discreetly mentioned to my friend that I thought I saw them come in with a little girl. He was also confused AF and said there was no little girl there and he had no idea what I was talking about. I do not do drugs, not even smoke pot. I'm prescribed Adderall for narcolepsy, but I take it as prescribed. I have never experienced seeing or hearing anything like this before, at least not to my knowledge, I guess. I had a mimosa with brunch, but was far from being drunk, not even slightly. I do consider myself extremely spiritual. I don't know if I'm using the proper terms and all, but I'm wondering if maybe I saw the ghost of a child from a previous miscarriage. Or maybe my friend's house is just haunted. Or maybe I'm losing it. What do you all think? My whole life has been filled with crazy otherworld experiences, but the most vivid ones that I can think of often are from my childhood home, a very rural area up in the mountains. It would take us 45 minutes to an hour to get into the city, driving up and down windy and dangerous roads. I'd love to share with you and hear what you guys have to say. Back in the early 2000s, my parents and I moved into a neighborhood that was heavily involved in witchcraft, Satanism, etc. We didn't actually discover this until we had moved away, so it all made sense afterwards. We lived in this house for 5 years. Our house was 2 stories. We had a basement, which was our family room, that also had a separate office room. We detached the door to this room so it would be permanently open, directly facing the couch we would sit on to watch TV together as a family. Adjacent to the office, we had an electric piano right against the wall, so the office entrance would be on our right if we were sitting there. To go upstairs, you'd have to directly pass the office and face the door that goes into our garage. This info will be important later. The first year was fine, but gradually, the events became more malicious and sinister to the point where we couldn't take it anymore. We were likely the only Christian family in our neighborhood, and I believe others quickly caught on because we didn't celebrate Halloween and didn't participate in giving out candy to the neighborhood kids. This angered our community, even though we were kind to others and kept to ourselves for the most part. Our house was egged, and we became a target of seemingly harmless pranks and house vandalism. Then, all of the paranormal events started happening after my black cat disappeared right before Halloween. We were coming home from church one night, and it was close to midnight. We pulled into our neighborhood, and sitting on the sidewalk corner, all by himself, was a little boy in a green shirt. My parents were slightly unsettled because it's unsafe and unusual for a child to be out this late at night. They considered talking to this boy, but when we drove by him, he looked up, and my parents saw that he had no face, a completely blank slate where his face should be. Needless to say, we booked it home, and my parents didn't tell me at the time, because I was maybe 5 or 6, to spare me from nightmares. But some years later, they told me this is what happened. Then, things started happening around the house. My mom and I used to take piano lessons, so one day, while my dad was cooking lunch, my mom was in the basement, practicing on the electric piano. I was in my parents' bedroom watching Stanley, a children's cartoon that was really popular back then. While my mom was practicing piano, a child's hand popped out of the office room and mimicked a child's voice, telling my mom to come and play. She thought it was me and told me to cut it out. The voice coerced her again to play, and my mom became irritated that I was distracting her from practicing, so she stomped into the office to find no one there. I'll never forget how pale she was when I heard her scream my name and run up the stairs. She asked my dad where I was, and since I heard her, I ran to her, asking what she needed from me. She asked me if I was messing with her, and I told her that I had no idea what she was talking about. My dad chimed in and said that I was in the bedroom the whole time, too. She concluded that it must have been her imagination, apologized to us, and went back downstairs. Not even 10 minutes later, she runs back upstairs, panicking, saying that the child's hand appeared again in the office, talking to her, and she knew it couldn't have been me. She was freaked out the rest of the day, for sure. Another instance was when we were watching The Ring in the basement at night. Around the time of the first jump scare of the movie, when they open the closet and see the disfigured girl, my dog starts barking like crazy at the same office entrance. He would charge at it and then back away, as if something was trying to force its way closer to us. It became really cold, and I started crying because I felt scared and uncomfortable at my dog's strange behavior. My dad turned on the light in the office, but nothing was there. My dog was going nuts, chasing something we couldn't see, so we decided to call it a night and go upstairs to bed. My dog had a big crate in the garage that he would sleep in, so my dad put him in there before we went to bed. At this point, we called a minister from our church to come and pray for us. He prayed for our protection, but things got so much worse after that. A few nights later, we all woke up to screaming coming from the garage. It sounded like a little girl being brutally unalived, screaming so loud it pierced our ears. My dog was also barking like crazy, so we knew we had to do something. My mom and I hid behind a dresser, and my dad hesitantly took a long decorative bamboo stick as his weapon to go to the garage and see what was going on. He said that he was shaking going downstairs, and the screaming got louder and more violent right up until his hand touched the doorknob. As soon as he did, complete silence. It was eerie and too quiet. The only thing making noise was my dog, whimpering and barking, so my dad got him as quickly as possible and noped right back upstairs. We started sleeping in the same room after that. Once we settled back down, my mom and I fell asleep first, but my dad was wide awake. He said that he could hear something pressing buttons on the TV remote on his bedside table. He didn't dare look, but shut his eyes and pretended to sleep until he eventually did. Another day, my mom was at work and Dad was outside mowing the lawn. Being an only child, not interested in AOL dial-up internet yet, had to find ways to entertain myself. I was spinning in circles until I'd make myself dizzy. Mid-spin, I saw a man standing in the hallway with a gun pointed right at me. I was so startled, but I was so dizzy, so I fell over, scared to death. I screamed for my dad and ran sloppily to the front door. I didn't want to look back if he was still there. Dad was worried sick for me in my panic state, but what can he do? What could any of us have done? Dad put the house up for sale and sold it to the first buyer. We were out of there so quick, it wasn't even funny. These events traumatized me, and I'm extremely hypersensitive to evil spirits and evil energy. Horror movies don't scare me at all compared to the real fear and panic you feel in those moments. Let me start this by saying, I, male 18, fully believe in the paranormal. I've always believed the stories and fully welcomed the opportunity for experiences to happen to me. Despite this, I never had a paranormal experience until 2 years ago, and I haven't really had one since. For context, I live in ultra-rural Alabama. When I say ultra-rural, I mean even the closest Dollar General is almost 20 minutes away. I live at the foot of a heavily wooded mountain. The further you drive up, the less populated it becomes. Even though I lived in this spot for my entire life, I had never driven up the mountain just because there was no need. The city was in the opposite direction of the mountain. From what I knew about going up, you just drove up and passed a few houses and eventually hit a dead end and would have to turn around. Well, one day, I had a friend over and we decided we wanted to hop on my golf cart and take a little joyride up the mountain. We drove for about 30 minutes. Granted, this golf cart only goes like 25 miles per hour max, and we had only really seen some beautiful forests and passed a couple of properties. But at this point, we came upon a spot in the road with a clearing off to the right. As we got closer, I realized it was a cemetery. I pulled over into the cemetery and turned my golf cart off. The main reason for this was curiosity. I had no idea there was a cemetery up the mountain, and it was strange to me, considering we barely had anyone living on the mountain, much less this far up. So my friend and I hop out of the cart and start walking towards the graves. Like I said, I fully believe in spirits and being respectful towards the dead, but my friend didn't at the time. So I'm respectfully looking around, reading the markers, attempting to stay a 6-foot distance from the headstones so I wasn't walking on top of the graves. Well, here my friend goes, on her phone, walking all over the graves. I think she even cracked a couple of jokes about some of the names on the headstones. Some of them were kind of weird, considering the people died in the late 1800s and early 1900s. After I sufficiently explored, I started walking back to the cart. Aloud, I declare, half joking, "Thank you, ghosts, for letting us walk around your space. Sorry we walked all over your graves." My friend yells at me, "Fuck them ghosts." I just roll my eyes. But honestly, I felt a slight shiver down my spine after she said it. I was kind of nervous at this point. We both hopped back in the golf cart, and I turned the key. Of course, it wouldn't start. I turned the key multiple times, but it seemed like the battery was dead. For the 3 years I had owned this golf cart, I never had an issue with it. So in my non-skeptical brain, I immediately felt that this was happening because of what my friend said about the ghosts. But honestly, at this point, I was scared. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking. So I decided to call my dad for help. I checked my service, and I had 2 bars, so I was good on cell signal. I called him, and the phone rang 5 times before he answered. I heard nothing on the other end, so I said, "Hello?" And I could hear heavy, raspy breathing in response. As soon as my brain slightly processed what I was hearing, my dad hung up. I tried to call him back, but my cell signal had now dropped off completely, even though I hadn't moved at all. So at this point, even my friend looked scared. We're both thinking the same thing. I'm beginning to hyperventilate, and I lay my head down on the steering wheel and just begin praying out loud for protection and help starting the cart. I tell my friend to pray as well, and she says, "Please let the cart start. I'm sorry for what I said." I turn the key, the cart starts, and I peel out of there as fast as possible. When I get home, my dad is outside working on one of his projects. My friend and I walk up to him, and I ask why he hung up on me because I needed help. He said he never received a call from me. I told him that's impossible because he picked up, and I heard him breathing over the phone. He showed me his recent calls, and he had no calls or missed calls from me. This was almost 3 years ago, and I haven't been back to the cemetery or had any other paranormal experiences since. Hi friends, I hope you're staying safe. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening. Sweet dreams.